This is Ryan with Stonefly Aquatic Nursery. This is episode 4 in our series, Aquatic Plants and Algaes. Today we're talking about submerged plants. So everything today is going to be submerged within the water column. They may have a plant or a leaf that floats on top, but the plant body is going to be completely within the water column. Let's talk about pondweeds first. So this is American floating pondweed. It's pretty common around here. It typically often becomes a problem in smaller ponds, something in that 1 acre or less. But it doesn't mean that larger water bodies can also be a problem or be given problems by it. It just tends to grow really aggressively and put out a really strong seed bed as well. But this plant can also be extremely useful for fisheries management and even for some waterfowl management. The seeds and the rhizome root mass that it creates can be utilized as food, and then the stems can be all kinds of housing for little bugs or small fish. This plant tends to have kind of elongated elliptical leaves that are greenish brown. Sometimes they can be a little more green or a little more brown. Just kind of depends on the different environmental variables. But it's a relatively common plant. Next is Illinois pondweed. It looks pretty similar to American. One of the biggest differences is that the length of the stem that connects the leaf to the main body of that plant is going to be much, much shorter on the Illinois versus the American pondweed. Again, it's going to be shorter on the Illinois pondweed. The Illinois pondweed also rarely has floating leaves, and when they're floating, they don't get that thick, same waxy kind of covering that we see from the American floating pondweed. But it does give some of the same benefits that we see from the American floating pondweed as well, being its seed production, root mass production, and then also housing through its stems. Next is Southern Naiad. It's very common. It's one of the many naiads that you'll see, but Southern Naiad tends to grow in calmer waters, and when it gets in those calmer waters, it tends to grow very, very thick mats to where it looks like you could almost walk across the pond or lake that it's in. So, in smaller water bodies, this can definitely cause some problems with access uh, for boating or fishing as well. But it can provide habitat for not waterfowl, but for bugs that the waterfowl are going to eat, that fish are going to eat, and then also some habitat for smaller fish as well. But if it's a small water body, you may want to keep your eye on it to keep it from uh, turning into something crazy. But it tends to grow in those thick patches, kind of like what we were talking about a second ago. And the coloring, the stem is typically a brownish color. Leaves tend to be more green. However, you may see the whole plant look more brown or more green, depending on different environmental variables. So it can look different from pond to pond, although it may be the same species. Next is Brittle Naiad. It's also called marine naiad. It's able to take fresh and brackish waters. It's got toothed leaves, and it's a really neat little plant. It's not something we see much around here, but it's a neat little naiad. Next is Cabomba. I almost think of umbrellas when I look at the leaves of these plants. Um, they're going to have a white to pink flower, and they're, again, just like all these other plants, they're going to be rooted down in the substrate, and the plant itself is going to be completely submerged. Eurasian Watermilfoil. This one is another non-native. It's native to Europe, Asia, and Africa. It's illegal to possess or own. It has caused some issues in some water bodies, hence it's um, illegal to possess. Um, but the leaves are typically in whorls of 3 to 5. The stems are going to branch off multiple times, and they're going to have reddish flowers that are going to come from their leafless spikes that are going to be above that water's surface. So something to watch out for is this Eurasian water milfoil. Coontail is another really common plant. It can kind of cause some similar problems like we might see from Southern Naiad. Um, but this is one of the few plants that's not going to be rooted. It may be, it may look like it's attached to the bottom via roots, but it's not going to be. These things are really, really weird in that sense, but they reproduce via fragmentation and seed. Their colors tend to be a darker olive brown color, but their new leaf growth can tend to be a brighter green. Now, eelgrass is one of my favorite plants. It just something about it, I don't know, but a lot of people call it tape grass, wild celery, or val. The val is short for Vallisneria, the genus that it is in. But most of the industry calls it eelgrass, so that's what we're going to stick with for today. They're going to have very elongated leaves, and they can be in up to 3 or 4 feet of water when the conditions are right. Those conditions being clearer water. That way, they're getting enough sunlight to photosynthesize and do what plants do. They also have a separate female and a male. So the females are going to produce a flower that's on this kind of winding, stringy stem, if you will, that the flower itself is going to float right at the water surface. The males, they have these little buds that are maybe an inch, inch and a half down at the base in between the leaves, and they're going to release the pollen. So in this left picture, those little white specks you see, that's pollen released by the males of this eelgrass so that the females can collect it into the flower to produce the seed. And the seed are going to be in these little, they almost look like green beans, these little pods once they start to develop. But they tend to make these, or they can make these pretty large forests, if you will, across the bottom of a lake or pond. And they don't tend to be as bad of a problem as you might see from Naiad or Coontail. You can run a lure through these a little more easily than Coontail. They don't get caught up quite as bad. When I say lure, I mean like a jig or something like that. If you take a crankbait through here with treble hooks hanging off, you're still going to have some problems. But you can generally get jigs and things like that, weedless worms, through this more easily than your coontails or your naiads. And fish seem to really like eelgrass. It seems to be really great for fisheries management. So that's another reason why I really like eelgrass so much. But to move on, because I could talk about eelgrass for a long time, is Elodea. Now, we don't see this one very much. It's a little too warm down here for us to get Elodea. But the reason I wanted to talk about it is Elodea looks very similar to Hydrilla. Hydrilla, which we'll talk about on the next slide, is a non-native illegal plant for most of the U.S., if I remember correctly, if not all the U.S. But focusing on Elodea, they're again rooted. They're going to have multiple branched stems, and they also are going to reproduce via seeds and floating fragments, something that they share with Hydrilla, aside from just how similar they look. The main thing to remember, in my opinion, is the Elodea is going to have 3 leaves coming off of a stem. And that's the easiest way to tell between Elodea, the native plant, and Hydrilla, the non-native. So let's go to Hydrilla. Hydrilla, again, non-native, but again, it's going to have 5 leaves on that stem opposed to the Elodea having 3. So again, Hydrilla is going to have 5, Elodea is going to have 3. Something else you can look at is Hydrilla, those leaves are going to be kind of serrated. They have that toothed midrib, and you can kind of feel they're almost like little paper cuts whenever you're grabbing and pulling some of those stems apart. So, but again, hydrilla is illegal to own, possess, or transport because it's caused a lot of problems because There's nothing to naturally control it, so it tends to overgrow and create a lot of mayhem. Water stargrass is a cool little plant. I tend to see it more in creeks or rivers just along the bank in some of that not fast but not slow flowing water. They can get up to 6 feet long. They put off this little yellow flower, usually around springtime into the summer. And they're going to reproduce by seeds and fragmentation as well, which I'm sure you're seeing is a common trend among many of these aquatic plants. A lot of them tend to have the ability to spread via fragmentation. So that's going to round out this episode. So next time we're going to be talking about emergent floating leaf plants, emergent slash floating leaf plants. So if you have any questions, please let us know down in the comments section. If you liked it, hit the thumbs up button. If you didn't like it, let me know what was wrong so I can fix it. Because I want you guys to get something from these videos. I want you to learn something and enjoy them. So thank you for watching, though. I do appreciate it.